All right. Get the camera on me so we can film. Mm, mm, mm. That's a nice little groove. Okay. Camera on me. Let's go. All right. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode here on the From the Farmyard podcast. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about when and what to plant late in the season. So, I had a friend who was late in planting her garden, and she asked me beginning of July, mind you, we're in the beginning of July now, and she's like, is there anything I can plant this late in the season? Because if you don't get a head start, as I'm from Pennsylvania, I have to start my seeds indoors because it literally takes that long for them to germinate and be ready to go in the ground outside. I have to have my seeds ready by my seeds are started in March or April. That's just how early we have to do it here. So she's like, what can I start? We're halfway, through the growing season. I think it's less than halfway, but for Pennsylvania, it's like halfway or so. What can I plant? And so maybe you're in that place as well. Maybe you got busy and you weren't able to get your garden in as soon as you'd liked. And now you're at the place where you have the time, but your seeds weren't started. Your plants aren't ready to go in the ground. And, that's okay. We can work with that. So in today's video, we're just going to cover the variety of plants that you can plant late in the season.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No. Go.
Before we start going over varieties or anything, if you hadn't started your seeds in March, April, and you did, go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, I think has some different stores that have plants. You might have to go to multiple different stores to find what you want, but they're already going to be started. They're going to be established, and some of them are already getting fruit on them. So that's a good way to just start if you haven't started your seeds.
Right. So ultimately, it really depends on where you live, your zone, and your growing period. So here in PA, I live in zone 5B, which means I have a growth period of about 3 to 4 months. That's the time when I can have plants outside. Now, granted, like I said, we'll start in March, but my last frost date isn't until May, the end of May. That's stupid for Pennsylvania. It's annoying, but whatever. It's where I live. It's what I have to deal with. So I've, went with those accommodations, and I've learned how I'm supposed to grow. And, through the years, we've gotten better at it. We've cultivated it, and we are able to do a much better process in growing our plants. So, do your research on where your zone is and what your frost dates are, because that's really a big, depictor of what you're going to plant, what you're going to be able to plant, when you're going to be able to plant it, how it's going to grow and live in your climate and your zone. So, do your own research on that. Farmer's Almanac is super helpful with that. That's how I learned mine. So if you want to look that up, it works perfectly, but that'll definitely get you going on the right track. So let's hop into some of the different plants that I know. This isn't all the plants. There's a crap ton of plants you can grow. We're not going to go over every single one. So we're just going over the few that we know, the few that we do. And obviously you're getting two different aspects of this, two different zones. Zach's from Virginia. I am from Pennsylvania. And if you've been to Pennsylvania, you've been to Virginia. They're very different in their, weather and their temperatures.
Yes. Your last frost date's the end of May. Your first frost date's middle of September. My last frost date is the end of March, and my first frost date is usually the beginning or middle of November. So very, very different climates for sure.
Yeah, that makes me jealous.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I live where I live. It's fine. So let's get into some of the different varieties of plants that you can grow now. So some plants take a while to germinate. Each plant's different. Each plant takes a certain period of time for the seeds to germinate properly. And if you're too late in okay. Let's take, for instance, peppers. Okay. Peppers, if you're too late in the season, no way you're direct sowing those puppies. Like, there's no way. Peppers take literally forever to grow. Even when you start inside, we started them in March, and my pepper plants are still like only this big. They're not even a foot. Like, they're tiny. But I mean, pepper plants aren't supposed to grow huge. So
and they don't do well when it's getting cooler at night.
Right.
And things like that.
So if you want to plant peppers, you're going to have to go to a greenhouse and get plants for that are already established, because peppers direct sown, it's not going to happen unless you direct sow them like the beginning of your growing season. Because if you're doing it in the middle of July here in Pennsylvania, it ain't going to happen. So that's my advice for peppers. Go out and get a plant. Your turn.
Summer squash. A lot of summer squash comes up. Well, really all squash, but for the sake of shorter growing seasons, summer squash in particular, you can get fruit as early as 45 to 55 days, depending on variety and how big you want them, things like that. They come up super quick, usually one of the first things to germinate. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like I said, fruit in a very short amount of time. So if you have a month and a half to 2 months left, throw some squash in the ground. Mm-hmm. And it's going to go crazy and you're going to be overrun with squash.
And I've also noticed with squash, they do prefer to be direct sown. So if you're doing it midsummer, it's totally fine. You don't have to start indoors. They'll do great direct sown.
A lot of things that don't like to be transplanted, which I know you transplant these things, so not saying you can't do it,
because we have to.
Yeah,
because we have to. We transplant everything.
Yeah, but it's more of it just takes longer for them to get used to being transplanted. Most melons and gourds, really anything that vines, they're kind of difficult to transplant anyways. But I mean, you do it successfully, so it can be done. Just know what you're doing. Don't let them get too confined and things like that.
So another plant that I have, we've planted early in the season and late in the season are peas. Peas can handle a light frost, nothing heavy, but obviously when you're getting to the end of your last frost and your first frost, they're nothing major. You could get a frost on here in Pennsylvania. Let's just say September 26th, we get a frost. It could be a week or so till we get the next frost, right? It's like, it's so up in the air. So your chances of that light frost are there past the, September frost date. But I mean, it's probably not going to be as heavy as it would be in December, which by December, you're getting snow. So like peas.
You're getting snow at the end of September.
This is very true. You're not getting snow. We are getting snow. Pennsylvania is so fickle, guys. It's so fickle. She likes to throw whatever she can at us. Mother Nature loves Pennsylvania. A little bit of rain, a little bit of hot, and then like mix the rain with the snow. Then you get Pennsylvania slush. If you're from Pennsylvania, you know what I'm talking about. Pennsylvania she's something else. You do the next one.
Tomatoes are the next one. These most take about 90 days. I've seen varieties that take as short as 60, maybe even 40, but I think 40 is kind of on the rare side. But definitely 60 to 90, more towards the 70 to 90 mark though, with planting. So if you don't have 3 months, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But if you can if somebody that has plants, you can find some suckers or if they have suckers on their plants, so if they have tomato plants, they do. See if you can come over and cut the suckers and then root them in water first. It's going to be your best bet in trying to get tomatoes. And I don't know how to really explain this. But you have the stem and you have the leaf right here. Right in this armpit right here is where your suckers are going to branch from, and that has the potential to be a whole nother plant. And most people cut off their suckers, so you can totally go and prune them off.
Which we'll have a video on pruning tomatoes, and Zach talks a little bit about, pruning off the suckers and stuff and how that works. And it'll be you'll be able to see it better with that video. So we'll have that coming out soon for you guys. So you'll just have a better understanding of what that looks like.
Yes. And we can post a picture on Instagram on Friday or things like that. We can do something like that.
Yep. That way you guys can just see what that looks like, and then you can go and do that yourself.
Yes.
So beans are relatively easy for planting late in the season. We do it every year. You direct sow beans. Beans do not get started indoors because beans their germination is it's usually pretty good. It pops up right when it's supposed to, does what it's supposed to do, and it's usually the germination rate's awesome, and they produce an abundance of beans. So if you plant them late in the season, that's totally fine. They'll grow, you'll get beans, and like I said, we plant early. Beans are a succession. That's how we do it here. We can get 2 harvests out of beans. So we'll plant beans, and then once they're done producing, we'll pull the beans and we'll plant more. And then that second batch will have a chance to come up. So that's what we do with beans. It's a succession plant. So typically any plant that you can succession can be planted late in the season.
Yes. And with beans, you're doing more green beans and things like that, whether it's pole or bush varieties. Things like shelling beans, things that need to be dry, well, don't need to be, but things that are better dried, those you won't be able to grow this late in the season unless you were to start them now and then probably cover them with something later in the season.
Right.
Me.
Mm-hmm.
Beets and radishes are something that you can plant really anytime except for like snow, obviously, unless you're covering them. But most varieties are like 16 days you can start harvesting, and I'm not like saying you can pull a whole radish in 16 days. Usually in about a month you can pull a full radish. But if you wanted microgreens or something, plant a lot and then go through and thin them and pull the microgreens out, and you can enjoy those as early as 16 days.
Mm-hmm.
But usually it's about a month that you can start harvesting.
Along with beets and radishes, do you want to cover potatoes and carrots too?
Yes, I can do that. Potatoes and carrots are one of those things that you can't really, you can grow it in the heat of the summer, but you have better results, and carrots tend to taste better if they have a frost get to them. So I would stick to planting those early in the spring or in the summer, or late in the winter. I'm all over the place, sorry y'all. Late in the winter or early in the spring, and then harvesting before it starts getting too hot, and then another round late summer, early fall before your frost comes. I mean, that's for my area. For you guys in Pennsylvania, that's a little bit different. You could probably grow them all year because it doesn't get all too hot there. And most varieties, I think it's 90 days, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 90 days for potatoes and carrots. I haven't grown any carrots this year, and I've slacked on my potatoes a little bit, but they're fine. You can grow them over winter. They can handle a light frost. So if you have a greenhouse and you can move them in or out, you can move them out during the day or whatever, totally do that.
And a huge thing with this is, You're fine. I asked you to go over those. You did. You did great.
Thank you.
So, a huge part of this is looking at your seed packets and seeing on the back, like, how long is it going to take for these to come up? Because obviously, last year I was faced with a situation where my plants were all wiped out. So I was faced with, man, we've got probably a month left of growing. Am I going to have time to plant some of these? Because I still wanted vegetables, right? So I was faced with that problem, and I took out all my seeds and I said, okay, this is what date we're at now, and this is how much time I have left. And I know that some plants can, tolerate a light frost. And I know that once you get one light frost, after that, it could be a lot of heavy frost, or it could be just, some light ones in between. But I was faced with that issue. And so I was looking at it and I was like, okay, here's the date we're at now, but here's the date that is going to be the first frost. So what can I fit in that time period? I don't remember what the time period was now, but let's just say a month. What can I fit in that month? And what can I grow that'll have enough time to come up and actually produce? So I pulled out all my plants, all my seeds, and I went through everything, and I looked at all the dates that it said, well, if you live in this area, plant this in April. Well, if we're here in August, we can't plant this in April. So let's just look at, what this seed says. How long does it take for these to germinate? And so through that, I figured out, man, I cannot plant anything. That sucks. End of the story right there for you. We were faced with that issue. It did stink that we weren't able to, plant anything else. But, look at the back of your seed packets is my whole point of this. Look at the back of your seed packets and figure out how long it's going to take to start a seed and for it to come up and produce.
Yeah, and also when you're looking at the back of the seed packet, they're assuming that you're starting them in April, like you just said.
Right.
Or as soon as you can possibly start them. And so they're not accounting, because in the spring, obviously, the days are starting to get longer and longer. You're getting more light. In the winter, that's not the case. You're probably going to need to account for an extra week or two in that period, just because the light's getting less and less. Not saying that it can't happen on the exact day or whatever, but account for 2 weeks, usually at least a week to 10 days, and you should be perfectly fine with that.
Right. So next, let's talk about cucumbers. So depending upon what variety you plant, cucumbers are there. I was able to throw in a batch of cucumbers in July, and I got some cucumbers in the next 2 months that I had left in my growing season. So cucumbers are definitely something that I think are possible to grow late in the season, but once they get hit by frost, they're done. Like once a plant gets hit by frost, they're basically finished. They're done. So, cucumbers are there, in my opinion. You're risking it for the frost, but you're also risking it for, like, there's a chance that you could get a harvest. So in my opinion, I think it's worth the risk to plant cucumbers late in the season if you have time. You're not going to get as many cucumbers as you would if you planted it early in the season. Obviously, when you're planting late in the season, as you would be right now, you're not going to get as big of a harvest as you would generally. But in my opinion, I think it's worth the risk to plant something and just see if it makes it. And then from there, you're learning, hey, that didn't come up. Now I know that I can't plant these 1 month left of my growing season, right? So take the risk. Yeah. I think it's worth it just to see if you get even the smallest harvest.
Yeah, and I would record what you find. I think it's I'm going to preach this all the time anyways, but I think it's really useful to keep like a garden log of what things worked better. If you had a really record everything, and then at the end of the at the end of that time, that plant's time, like when you're harvesting everything, note all of that and say, hey, we had a really good harvest this time from planting this date, letting it grow until this date, and try doing it again. If it's the same results, then you found a perfect window. And this video is really more for like northern gardeners who
this is an issue
your growing
for them.
time is limited anyways. Yeah, your growing season's limited. We're in the 1st of July. I can plant tomatoes and still get a lot.
You southerners can plant just about whatever you want and it works out. Yeah. See, us northerners have a time crunch. So you know what? From northerner to northerner, you guys out there, I'm sorry. And I'm here to help you. I'm trying to figure out what you can grow because I feel like everybody should garden because it's just so peaceful and so relaxing. And, you know, if you're getting late into doing it and you want to grow your own food, you know, I'm sorry that you're late, but I'm going to do my best to help you out here and tell you the plants that you can plant late in the season.
Yes. And from southerner to northerner, I would recommend renting a beach house in Florida and putting in a garden there.
Or just move, whatever you prefer.
Or just move. That's fine too. No, there are definitely ways that you can garden anywhere, and we're here to help you guys figure those ways out. We have 2 completely different climates. We're here to help everybody.
Exactly. You gonna cover herbs and flowers then?
Yes. Herbs you can really grow anytime. They're a little bit slower coming up for me, in my opinion, but it might just be because if I'm doing it and I don't water when I'm supposed to. But they're doing fine. I didn't plant any until later this year because it was just, I didn't really know where to plant them. So I ended up sticking them in some pools or some kiddie pool gardens that I had, and they're doing really fine. They did take slower to come up, but I was comparing them with beans, and you should never compare anything to beans because beans come up no matter what. And that was my problem because I planted my arch trellis and I planted it probably 4 or 5 times because they didn't come up. And then one day I came out there and there was like 100 bean seeds, and I was like, whoa, we need to thin you guys. But this is not beans. Herbs you can plant anytime. You just need to know what you're using them for and whether or not they spread, because that's something that you need to look at. Spearmint spreads, and there's something else that spreads that I can't remember for the life of me.
Chamomile goes crazy. Oregano goes crazy. A lot of herbs go crazy.
But do those take over the garden where you can't plant anything else? Okay, well then oregano.
As far as I know, I've grown a couple. Lemon balm goes crazy too. I've grown a couple herbs. I'm not an herb gardener at all. I'm more vegetable minded. It's just I'm not used to herbs. But from my experience with that, I had a chamomile plant, and the chamomile plant is pulled out of the bed, but for some reason, probably like 10 yards away, I don't even know how it got over there, but there's a chamomile plant in my field. I don't know how it got there. Honestly don't. But right off the deck where the bed was, there's chamomile now there. So if you pull the plants, they're not going to come back up. I mean, they could, but like, you just pull them like
things like that spread, you can pull out, like with spearmint, you can pull out the plant, but if there's one root there, it will continue growing.
They're persistent little suckers.
They are, and I think it's the same thing with rhubarb. Don't quote me on that because I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure rhubarb is the same way. I've done very little research on that.
I'm not a rhubarb farmer, so I wouldn't know.
With the herbs, make sure you know what you're doing with them and how long they have, along with the space requirements and if they spread or not, because if they spread, you might consider doing them in a kiddie pool. Like I have a lot of my plants. And for some people that might not work, but if you can try that, or a 5-gallon bucket, 5-gallon buckets, perfection. I have like 100 of them. They come in so handy, I'm telling you. And yeah, but try to figure out that if you want to actually harvest basil for preserving, you might want to get earlier start, or if you just want to do it now and do basil teas, or just have fresh basil, or I'm using basil as an example, anything really, but anything along those lines. If you want to dry it, start it earlier in the season, and yeah, you'll be fine. So you could start them now, but you're not going to get the full potential of anything. Anything on this list you could start now. You're just not going to get the full potential or
Right.
list anything potentially.
You're taking the risk.
Yeah.
It could be worth it. Risk it for the biscuit, guys. Risk it for the biscuit. Could be worth it, could not. But I mean, I'd rather get a harvest than be afraid of a frost and realize, oh, I could have totally done that.
Exactly. Like the same with my area, not so much with your area because you guys get really cold pretty quick. With us, my first frost date, I think they said it was as early as October 15th last year. We didn't get a frost until the middle of November, a whole month later. So if I would have planted things then, I could have planted, or I could have still been harvesting into November, which I still was, the things that didn't die, but
right.
Or the things that, all in all. Flowers. Do you want me to go ahead and cover that really quick?
Yep, because we're coming down to the last couple minutes, just a heads up.
Okay. Flowers, you can plant any flowers. Right now, I think the quickest flowers to come up are zinnias and cosmos. And nasturtiums are actually pretty well. Nasturtiums came up really quick for me. So I would say those three are really good to plant.
Sunflowers don't take that long either.
They don't take that long to germinate, but if you're wanting to get the flower
head,
the full head on them, you need to wait. Like I planted my mammoth Russians at the beginning of the year. I think it was April something. They still haven't opened. They're getting ready to open though, and I'm so
happy. It is so fun to see them flower. It's so much fun.
We have an inside sunflower joke, but we won't go into that.
Sunflowers are superior.
They are.
Sunflowers are fun. But like, lastly, I'm just gonna throw it out there. Fruit. If you're planting any type of fruit, those take forever. Your chances of planting them in the typically fruit that you're growing, they're not gonna come up. Like if you planted them in July, right? You're not gonna get a harvest at the end of your frost year period. But like next year, you could get that. You can plant pretty much fruit anytime in the summer, but like you're not going to get a harvest till the next year because fruit typically have to get established. Yeah. So like apples and grapes and raspberries, blueberries, those all need to be established beforehand.
And strawberries too. I would say you could get some depending on like varieties and things, but I think I read this somewhere, I can't remember where, but it's best if you let them be the first year and just let the fruit stay on there just so later on it can improve yield.
Right. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you were interested in planting fruit. You can plant those in the summer, but your chances of getting a harvest aren't there. Next year's probably going to be when your harvest comes.
Yes.
But I think that's everything for today's video. We hope this inspired you to now be like, oh, not hopeless after all. I can actually still plant some things. Look up your frost dates, look up your zones, and figure out what works for you. Obviously, do your own research. We always recommend that because we're talking about things that work for our areas, for our zones. And, if you're from my area, then oh, like Reagan's speaking on the things that work in this area, right? But if you're from out west, I can't help you there. But like, obviously, I'm throwing out, there's some things that you can plant now that maybe you didn't get to in the spring. And that's okay. We all get behind on things. It's okay. You can still get a garden in. And I, inspire you. I hope this inspires you to go and plant a garden.
And the best thing that you can do is try to find a gardener in your area who's been gardening even for just 3 years. You learn so much in a 3-year period. The first year you learn a lot, but in 3 years, try to find somebody along those lines who's been gardening for a year or two and just see what you can learn from them, or find somebody who's been gardening there for 50 years. Anything will work. But yes.
And if you have any more questions, guys, make sure to leave them in the comments below. We always want to answer your questions, and we're here to help. And just like this here, this was viewer suggested, this video. So some of you guys may want to learn something. Ask us, and we'll do a video on it.
Yes.
So thank you guys for joining us here today on another episode of the From the Farmyard podcast, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye, y'all.